Let's go ahead and get started. We have been covering parables on Wednesday night ever since about the middle of March, and now we're going to continue with the teachings of Jesus. And Jesus, as we've seen, teaches in parables. But in the Gospel of John, Jesus also teaches, but his teaching style, as recorded by John highlights the kind of teaching that Jesus does that's not necessarily parables as we think of them. He continues to teach using imagery and figurative language and metaphor, which all of that, technically speaking, is parabolic, is parable kind of ways of communicating. But we tend to limit, and it's wrong, but we tend to limit parables to stories. But really, any time that you're teaching using metaphor, figure, or imagery, you're teaching in parables. And so what I want to do is continue the series, but I want to look at the kind of teaching that John records in the life of Jesus. And to kind of narrow the scope of the kind of teaching in the Gospel of John to suit our series, let's focus on the I am statements. The I am statements. There are 7 I am statements in the Gospel of John. 7 I am statements that are joined with a metaphor or with imagery. There's other I am statements in the Gospel of John. In fact, there's quite a few. If you went through and looked, if you could see it in Greek, you could see the 2 words right next to each other: ego, eimi. Ego, eimi. I am. Over and over and over in the Gospel of John. It's actually quite a bit. Because Jesus, in his teaching in John, he is teaching about himself. He is teaching about his identity. In the Gospel of John, there's not just a whole lot of ethical imperatives, teachings of the kingdom about how to conduct yourself. There is some of that, like going, as I have done for you, so you do for others, washing each other's feet, things like that. But in general, there's less focus on ethical commands and more focus on the identity of Jesus. And so these I am statements, this imagery, this metaphor about Jesus saying, I am, for instance, the bread of life. Well, these are teachings, and it's figurative teachings, but it's teachings about the identity of Jesus. I am statements. So I just want us to sort of overview or survey the I am statements real quick, and then look at a couple of reflections about these I am statements and apply them. And then we'll tackle each one of those for a while, depending on how long this teaching to an empty audience, an empty auditorium continues. So, see if you can remember the I am statements in the Gospel of John. Are any of them coming to your mind? I've already said one, I am the bread of life. That's in chapter 6. In fact, Freddie Gallo led our communion at the 12 o'clock service last Sunday, and this was the text that he read and that he reflected on. I am the bread of life. All right, it's not very fun to do this question and answer stuff when there's nobody here. But I am the light of the world, chapters 8 and 9. I am the good shepherd, and I am the door to the pasture, or the gate to the pasture. Both of those are in chapter 10. Chapter 11, I am the resurrection and the life. Chapter 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And chapter 15, I am the vine, and you are the branches. Those are the 7 I am statements. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the Gospel of John. Now there's one that in chapter, I believe it's in chapter 8, where he says, before Abraham was, I am. It's not metaphor, it's not imagery, but it's I am in the absolute sense. And you can of course see overtones, or it's picking up on the Exodus chapter 3, I am. When Moses says, when they ask who sent me, what should I tell them? And the answer is, I am that I am. So as Jesus is reflecting on his identity, as Jesus is teaching about his identity and who he is to humanity, he is making a claim of divinity and making a claim that his identity is the identity of the great I am, the eternal one. So keep that in mind as we look at all of these I am statements, is that while they're very earthy and while we're dealing with very common things like bread and a road or a way and light and shepherds, he is making a lofty, highest claim, that is the great I am. Now, let's start with just thinking about these 7 I am statements. One thing to consider: why would he say such a thing? I am bread. I am light. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the door. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. I am the vine. Why is he making all these claims? Why does he attach his identity to these images and these common things? Consider that, number one, all of these things are very, very, very familiar, very much woven into the fabric of life in Israel at that time. All right, so they're items that are common, items that are needed, items that are known. Also, consider that each of these has if you will, an Old Testament antecedent. Each of these are not just common items in Palestinian village life. These also have a linkage, or they're tethered to, or they're informed by Hebrew Scripture and the story of God's faithfulness to His covenant people, Israel. So it's not simply that Jesus sees a loaf of bread and says, "Hey, I'm bread." It's not simply that He's connecting with the people in their common objects of life. It's also that He's tying into the story of Israel with each of these claims. Another thing to consider is the context in which each of these statements or claims are made. For instance, the people have come out to the wilderness because there is a lot of talk about Jesus taking just a little bit of bread and making a lot of bread. And they want Him to do it again. And they come to Him longing for and wanting more bread. And Jesus says, "I am the bread of life." In chapters 8 and 9, Jesus heals a blind person, and He's talking about darkness and life, spiritual blindness. And in the context about sight and blindness, light and darkness, Jesus says, "I am the light of the world." Chapter 11, Jesus seems to deliberately wait before He goes to Lazarus's home. And by the time He gets there, Lazarus is dead. And one of the sisters meets Him as He approaches the city and the town. And she says, "If you'd only been here, if you could have come sooner." And Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life." Amidst the tragedy of a premature death, amidst the tragedy of the loss of a loved one to death, Jesus says, "I am life. I am resurrection." Philip says, "Just show us the way and that'll be enough for us. Show us the way." Jesus is saying, if you've seen the Father, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And they want to know which way we're going. And Jesus says, "I am the way." And it's not always just the I am statements where Jesus talks like this. It's not just in the I am statements. It's also, for instance, in chapter 4 with the Samaritan woman. They're at a well, and she's come a long ways to come to this well to get water, and Jesus is there with her at the well. And He says, "I could give you water, and if you drank this water, you'd never be thirsty again." So a woman comes looking for water, and Jesus says, "Oh, I could give you water, and if you had this water, you'd never be thirsty again." People come looking for bread, and Jesus says, "I'm bread." There's controversy about Jesus healing a blind person, and Jesus says, "I am the light that gives sight to the world." Where are we going? Jesus says, "I'm the way. I am the truth. I am the life." Amidst death, Jesus says, "I am resurrection. I am life." In a longing for good leaders, faithful leaders, trustworthy leaders, and in an indictment against false leaders, Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd. Jesus says, I'm not just the good shepherd, I'm also the entrance into the good pasture. All that to say that Jesus ties into their story. He meets them where they are, using objects that are familiar to them, but he also claims to be that which they need most, that which they are longing for, that which they are clamoring for. Look no further, Jesus says over and over with these I am statements. You've come looking for bread. Actually, you've been looking for me all your life. I will give you what you need, and I am all you need. I'm all you need. I'm all you need. Now that's news for the world, isn't it? That's something that you and I need to be reminded of, isn't it? As we wish for, as we clamor for, as we angle for, as we are antsy and lack contentment, wanting, wishing. Jesus says, I am all you need. Well, we're going to dive a little deeper into the I am statements as we continue this way that Jesus teaches using imagery. God bless.